This is the story of a white corrections officer whose life is shaped by deep-rooted hatred toward black people. But everything begins to shift when he loses the most precious part of his life. In his grief, he crosses paths with a black woman who, like him, has also lost everything. Together, they begin to discover a new path, one that offers them both a second chance at life. The story begins with Hank, a man working as a corrections officer in a prison. He lives with his aging father and his son, both of whom also work in the same prison system. Hank's wife has passed away. One morning, while eating breakfast with his father, they notice a few black boys playing near their garden. Hank's father, who harbors deep prejudice, demands that Hank chase them away. Unfortunately, Hank has also internalized that same hatred over time, a reflection of how often families and societies pass down generational biases. Hank steps outside, pulls out his gun, and warns the kids to leave his property. But then, to his surprise, he sees that his son is with them. His son calmly says they're his friends, but Hank coldly replies that he doesn't care. Those boys are not welcome there again. Later, as Hank prepares to leave for work, the father of the two boys approaches him. He explains that his sons would never harm anyone. Then, in a firm but non-threatening tone, he says, "If you have a problem or want to fight, take it out on me, not my kids." But Hank remains unmoved. He responds by saying that those boys must never come near his property again. After the incident, Hank heads off to work. There, we see that a dangerous inmate is scheduled to be executed, and Hank's son has been assigned the task of carrying it out. Since this is part of their job, Hank begins training his son to handle the process. However, during the preparation, his son makes a mistake. Hank firmly tells him that he needs to stay focused and confident. "This is just our job. You don't need to carry any guilt in your heart." Next, we're introduced to the inmate on death row. His name isn't mentioned here, but his presence is powerful. Today, his wife Leticia and their young son come to visit him. We learn that the inmate is a talented artist, and Leticia shares that their son has inherited his gift. The boys' drawings are so impressive that one is about to be published in the school magazine. Hearing this brings joy to the inmate's face. He lovingly tells his son that this would be the last time they'll see each other. The little boy, too young to fully understand, innocently asks why. The inmate had been imprisoned for years after committing a serious crime. Leticia has always made an effort to bring their son to see his father, but now she's emotionally worn out. With the execution set for the next day, she quietly walks away with her son, leaving behind a heavy silence. The next day, we see Hank and his son approaching the inmate one final time. The inmate calmly requests permission to make a drawing before his execution. Hank agrees. With only Hank and his son present, the inmate begins to sketch, and the subject of his art is none other than Hank and his boy. Deep down, he wishes he could speak to his own son one last time, but the senior officers deny him that chance. Meanwhile, back home, Leticia and her son wait beside the phone, hoping for a call that never comes. Inside the prison, preparations for the execution begin. As the inmate is led down the corridor for his final walk, something unexpected happens. Hank's son suddenly vomits. It's his first time witnessing such a moment, and the emotional weight becomes too much. The execution goes on, but afterward, Hank furiously lashes out his son, blaming him for ruining the inmate's last walk. He even raises his hand in anger, but is stopped by the other officers. The next morning, Hank enters his son's room and coldly tells him to leave the house. Pushed too far, the son grabs his service revolver and forces his father out into the living room, where Hank's father is also present. In a heartbreaking moment, he asks his father, "Do you hate me?" Hank responds, "Yes, I always have. You're the reason your mother died." Fighting back tears, the son says, "But I've always loved you." Moments later, he takes his own life in front of them. The shock is unbearable. Crushed by guilt, Hank buries his son in the backyard and burns his uniform, a silent act of remorse and surrender to the weight of everything he's lost. The pain runs so deep, it pushes Hank to the point where he even resigns from his job. Hank seals off his son's room, closing the door on a chapter of his life that left him broken. Meanwhile, we see Leticia returning home from work, carrying heavy stress on her shoulders. She has just been fired and is now burdened with the responsibility of caring for her young son. The boy struggles with obesity, falling into the medically concerning category. Leticia desperately wants him to stay healthy, but juggling motherhood and unemployment has left her drained. With no income, there's a looming fear that they might lose their home if she doesn't find a job soon. Elsewhere, Hank is seen visiting a small diner to enjoy his favorite ice cream. On this particular day, a new waitress takes his order, and it turns out to be Leticia. She has finally found work there. After finishing his dessert, Hank visits a woman his son used to spend time with. She gently asks where his son is, sensing his deep sorrow. Hank is overwhelmed with grief, still haunted by guilt and longing. Later at home, his father coldly tells him, "You remind me of your mother. She was a coward just like you. You shouldn't have quit your job. After she died, I enjoyed my life. You should do the same." Hank, however, sees past his father's harshness and realizes the loneliness he's living in. Had his mother still been alive, maybe things would have turned out differently for his dad. Trying to distract himself and escape his pain, Hank decides to buy a gas station in town, something to keep his hands busy and his mind occupied. One rainy night, as Leticia finishes her shift at the restaurant, she realizes the downpour is relentless. Without an umbrella of her own, she takes one left behind by a customer and heads out with her son. But as they walk down the street, a speeding car suddenly hits her boy. Out of nowhere, Hank arrives on the scene. Without hesitation, he picks up the injured child and rushes him to the hospital. But sadly, the injuries are too severe. Her son doesn't survive. Leticia is devastated. Overwhelmed with grief, she collapses into Hank's arms. The officer at the scene gently tells Hank to take her home. He nods and brings Leticia back to her place, trying to offer comfort. At her home, Hank assures her that he's already spoken to the police. They'll find the people responsible for the hit and run. But Leticia, shattered and defeated, replies, "Nothing's going to happen. No one investigates the deaths of black people around here." Hank doesn't argue. He understands her pain. After all, he too has lost a son. A few days later, as Hank heads out one morning, he unexpectedly runs into the two black boys and their father, the same ones he once drove off his property. They offer their condolences for his son's death. For the first time, Hank asks the boys their names. Then, quietly, he drives away. Along the road, he spots Leticia walking to work. He slows down and says he's headed in the same direction, to the diner. She accepts the ride. That night, Hank returns to the restaurant for his usual ice cream. Leticia is working. As the evening winds down, he finishes up and offers to drive her home again, mentioning that her place is on his way. She agrees. On the drive, she turns to him and gently asks, "Why did you help me that day, when my son was hit?" Hank replies with quiet honesty, "Because I understand your pain. I lost my son too. He was a good boy, but I never truly understood him, and that pain still lives inside me." Later that evening, Leticia invites Hank to her home. Inside, the two share a quiet drink. Leticia is overwhelmed with pain and grief. She's been holding everything in for too long. In that vulnerable moment, needing comfort and human connection, the two grow closer. The next morning, Hank returns to his house and finds his father on the floor, having fallen from his bed. The injury suggests he can no longer take care of himself. Hank now realizes his father needs constant care. Shortly after, Hank visits his neighbors, the same black family he had once driven off his property. He heads to their garage to repair his late son's old truck. Once it's fixed, Hank drives it over to Leticia and gently tells her, "I want you to have this. I know you walk to work every day, and it always makes you late." Though hesitant at first, Leticia finally accepts the gift after Hank insists. Their bond has grown much deeper now. In return, Leticia buys Hank a special hat, something she knows he'd like, and goes to his home to surprise him. But there, she's confronted by Hank's father, who still carries hateful beliefs. He coldly asks who she is. When she replies, "I'm Hank's friend," he responds with cruel arrogance, saying, "Back when I was young, I used to enjoy being with black girls. My son takes after me." Leticia feels deeply insulted. Her face tightens with hurt and fury. She storms out of the house. Just then, Hank arrives and tries to stop her, but she refuses to stay. Once she's gone, Hank confronts his father, furious over what just happened. The truth hits him hard. His father hasn't changed and never will. Unable to care for him anymore, Hank places his father in a nursing home. When his father protests, saying he doesn't want to spend the rest of his life that way, Hank quietly responds, "Neither do I." He finally realizes that if he keeps following his father's path, he too will end up bitter, alone, and empty. That evening, Hank goes to Leticia's restaurant, hoping to make things right. But Leticia still refuses to speak with him. Quietly, Hank returns to the gas station he recently purchased. He paints the walls fresh and gives the place a new name, Leticia. When his friend curiously asks, "Who's Leticia?" Hank simply smiles and replies, "She's my girlfriend." The man who once carried hatred in his heart for black people is no longer the same. Life has taught him that no one is lesser than anyone else. Not by race, not by background. Meanwhile, Leticia faces her own storm. A bank officer arrives at her house, and since she hasn't been able to make her payments, her belongings are removed. With nowhere else to turn, she calls Hank. Without hesitation, he shows up, helps move her things, and brings her into his home. He places her son's belongings in the room that once belonged to his own son and softly says, "I want to take care of you. Always." Leticia feels the warmth in his words. They've both found love again. That night, they grow closer once more. Later, Hank steps out to get his favorite ice cream. One for him and one for Leticia. While he's gone, Leticia enters his son's room and notices a drawing pinned on the wall. It's the same sketch her husband made of Hank and his son before his execution. The truth dawns on her. Hank was the officer who carried out her husband's sentence. The realization hits hard, but within moments, she understands that Hank was simply doing his job, bound by the law. When Hank returns, she doesn't say a word. Her eyes are filled with tears, not blame. In silence, she softly says, "Let's sit on the porch and have our ice cream." The two sit side by side in the quiet night. Hank gently feeds Leticia with his own hands. Though both carry deep pain, being together has made that pain easier to bear. Once, Hank was filled with hatred taught by his family and community. But now, that hatred has vanished. He understands something profound. Those who see themselves as superior to others are the smallest people of all. And with that message, this beautiful and soul-stirring story comes to an end. Sometimes, life breaks us in places we never thought possible. It takes away the people we love, tests our beliefs, and leaves us standing alone in silence. But even in that silence, healing can begin. Two people, broken by loss, found each other not through perfection, but through pain, through understanding. Monsters Ball isn't just a story of love, it's a story of redemption. It reminds us that hatred is taught, but compassion is chosen. And when we choose love over hate, even the deepest wounds can begin to heal. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and share it with someone who needs to feel hope again.